Video system initializing, signal stable, transmission begins in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Gaming is not in a rough patch, it is realigning. Something is shifting in gaming right now. Not slowly, not quietly, and I think many people are still talking about it like it's just a temporary rough patch or something. But that is not what this is anymore. I think it's straight up a realignment. And once you look at it that way, a lot of what is happening in the industry makes more sense. Because over the last couple of years, we have watched some of the biggest Western AAA games struggle in ways that would have sounded impossible a few years ago. We have seen expensive live server games launch with massive corporate backing, collapse almost immediately. We have seen legacy franchises return after years of development and still cannot connect with the audience they were supposed to win back. We have seen major studios release games that marketed the budget and the brand recognition but still did not create the player excitement those companies expected. And more players seem hesitant to buy new games at full price. This is the part people should pay attention to, because those are not just, bad luck moments, they're signals. They tell us something important about where players are putting their trust, where they are pulling it back, and why the old AAA formula is not hitting the same way it used to. I want to talk about why I think this is happening. Not from the angle of, AAA is dead, not from the angle of indie games are better, and not from the lazy, West versus East argument either. I think the actual story is simpler than that. Players are not tired of games, not even close. They are tired of being disappointed by games that had every resource in the world and still chose the wrong priorities. The thing is, I do not think players became impossible to please. I think the price of trust went up while the quality of the product went down. When a game costs, $70 and launches unfinished, players notice. When the same studio does it again, players remember. And when the next game comes out and the marketing feels like it's telling players their criticism is the problem, a lot of players just stop arguing, they just leave. This is the part a lot of companies still seem slow to understand for some reason. Gaming is optional. Nobody has to buy a game. Nobody has to defend the studio. Nobody has to stick around for the 10th apology post, the 5th roadmap, or the "we hear you" statement after the game already launched broken. Games are not medicine. They're not taxes. They are products people buy with their own money after working real hours at a job that they probably don't even like anyway. So when a game makes players feel ignored, talked down to, or treated like walking wallets, those players do not have to debate forever. They can just move on. Refund that. Wait for a sale. They can go back to older games. They can buy a $20 indie game that actually respects their time and their wallet. That is why this matters. Because once trust breaks, marketing has to work twice as hard just to get players back to neutral. And a lot of AAA studios are finding out that brand loyalty is not unlimited. My own buying habits changed too. I noticed this shift in myself before I even had the words for it. There was a time where I would see a big studio name, a familiar franchise, or a flashy trailer, and I would at least be curious. Even if I was skeptical, there was still the feeling of, okay, maybe this one will be worth checking out. But now I wait. I watch gameplay, wait for reactions. I wait to see if the launch is actually stable. I wait to see if the game is fully, ready for a full experience, or if it's just a store page with combat attached to it. And I do not think I'm alone in that. The industry trained many players to wait. Broken launches trained them. Aggressive monetization trained them. Overhyped trailers trained them. Games that needed 6 months of patches before they felt finished trained them. So when people say players are too negative now, I think that misses the point. A lot of players are not negative for no reason. They are cautious because they have been burned too many times. And once that happens, the whole relationship changes. The player is no longer asking, should I buy this? They're asking, why should I trust this? That is a much harder question for the studio to answer now. What stands out to me is not just, which games are struggling. It is where the excitement is going instead. Players still get excited when a game gives them a reason to care. They still share trailers. They still talk about combat systems, art direction, worlds, stuff like that. They still want games that feel big, bold, strange, beautiful, stylish, and just alive. So the issue is not that players hate new games. The issue is that players are becoming more selective about which games deserve their attention. You can see that with games like, Black Myth Wukong. Whether somebody loves it or has criticisms of it, the reason it's out is clear. It felt like a studio was building around a strong creative vision and not just a checklist. You can see it with Monster Hunter Wilds. That game had massive anticipation because Capcom has spent years building trust with that audience through consistency, identity, and a clear understanding of what players want. You can see it with games like Crimson Desert and Pragmata. People are not just excited because the game looks, expensive. They're excited because they look like they have an actual identity. That is the difference. Players can feel when a game has a spine. They can feel when a world has a direction. They can feel when a studio is trying to make something memorable instead of trying to satisfy every trend at the same time. And right now, that kind of clarity stands out because so many big games feel like they were designed in a meeting room before they were ever designed for the players. But here's another thing. Indie games are winning a different battle entirely. Something interesting is happening on their side. Indie games are not winning because every indie game is perfect. That would be a little ridiculous. There are plenty of forgettable indie games. There are plenty of indie games that, launch broken, look generic, or fail to find an audience. But the good ones are winning because they understand the deal they are making with the player. A smaller game does not need to pretend to be everything. It can focus. It can have a sharp identity. It can take one strong idea and build a total experience around it. And when that game costs $15, $20, or $30, players often feel like the risk is fair. That's important. Because a $20 indie game that respects a player's time can beat $70 AAA games that treats players like a revenue source. Not because the indie game has better graphics, a better world, or more content, but because the player feels the difference in intent. They feel like the game was made to be played, not extracted from. And that is a big difference. The indie side is only going to get more mature. More developers are sharing resources. More studios are collaborating. More tools exist for developers who do not have, a massive publisher backing. More players are comfortable buying games who do not look like traditional AAA products. That does not mean indie games is easy. It is still hard to stand out in this industry. But the foundation underneath independent gaming feels stronger than it used to. Players have more places to go when AAA gaming disappoints them. The studios winning right now are doing simple things really well. They are mostly doing the basics right. They're giving players finished games. They're giving those games clear identities, and they are building characters and worlds people actually want to spend time in. They're not putting in a monetization wall between the player and the experience every 5 minutes. And when they do make mistakes, the studios listen before the relationship with the audience gets poisoned. That should not sound radical. That should be the normal standard. But right now it almost feels radical because the industry spent years trying to stretch what players would tolerate. How unfinished can a game be at launch? How much can we charge? How many editions can we sell? How much can we carve out? How much friction can we add before people start complaining? How much criticism can we redirect before players stop trusting us? And now I think the answers are becoming clear. Players have limits. They may not leave all at once. They may not boycott. They may not all make angry videos or long posts. But they do change their behavior. They stop pre-ordering. They stop buying at launch. They wait for discounts. They skip games they would have bought 5 years ago. All these things I've done myself too. And eventually that behavior shows up in the numbers. That is why this shift matters. Because trust rarely disappears in one dramatic moment. It drains slowly. Then one day a studio launches a game and realizes the audience wasn't even there anymore. Now I want to be clear about something here. This is not me saying AAA games are automatically bad. That is too simple. Some AAA studios still make good games. Some large studios still care about polish, world building, combat, storytelling, and giving players a complete experience. And not every player wants a small indie game. Sometimes people want the big cinematic game. Sometimes people just want the open world. Sometimes they want the expensive production, the giant boss fights, the motion capture. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem is not size, the problem is priority. A big budget is not the issue. A big budget with no creative direction is the issue. A massive team is not the issue. A massive team being pulled in 10 different directions by executives, trends, monetization targets, and fear of risk is the issue. That's why I do not like the AAA versus indie framing by itself. It misses the deeper point. The real divide is not small games versus big games. The real divide is trust versus extraction. It is the difference between a studio that sees players as an audience to serve and a studio that sees players as a resource to manage. That is the line players are reacting to. This is bigger than one bad launch. It is bigger than one studio. It is bigger than one franchise falling off a cliff. What we are seeing is a wider change in how players judge value. For years, the industry could rely on the idea that bigger meant better. Bigger worlds, budgets, trailers, marketing campaigns, and promises. But players have seen enough to know that bigger does not always mean better. Sometimes bigger means more bloated, more cautious, more expensive, but less focused. Sometimes it means the game has a giant world, but nothing in it feels worth remembering. And that is where the industry point gets industry. The old formula was spend more, promise more, market harder, but that formula starts breaking when players no longer believe the promise. Because marketing can create awareness. Marketing can create hype. Marketing can get a trailer in front of millions of people, but marketing cannot rebuild trust in the experience. Keeps disappointing people. At some point, the game has to speak for itself. And right now, more players are listening to the game itself, and not just the surrounding campaign. That's why some smaller games can cut through the noise. This is why non-Western studios are gaining attention. This is why some older franchises with strong player trust still hit hard. Because players are not just asking, how big is this? They're asking, does this actually respect my time and my wallet? I also do not think this should be reduced to the West is losing to the East. That is a tempting argument because it is simple, but I think it misses too much. There are Western studios making good games. There are Eastern studios making flawed games. There are indie developers everywhere making incredible work. There are massive companies everywhere capable of making the same corporate mistakes. So no, I don't think the geography is the real point. The real point is player trust. Some studios spent years making deposits into that trust account. They released good games, listened to feedback, built strong identities. They gave players a reason to believe the next game would be worth paying attention to. Other studios kept withdrawing from that account. They launched broken games, overpromised, chased trends. They treated criticism like a public relations issue instead of a product issue. And now they are finding out that decades of brand recognition will not protect them forever. That is the lesson. A famous logo can get people to look. It cannot force them to care. And it definitely cannot force them to buy at full price when the trust is gone. The takeaway is actually pretty simple. Players are not tired of games. They're tired of excuses, broken launches. They're tired of being sold potential instead of a finished product. They're tired of games that feel like financial systems wearing the skin of entertainment. They're tired of being told they are the problem when they point this out. The studios that survive this shift are going to be the ones that earn player trust through the quality of their work, not through IP recognition, nostalgia, marketing budgets, and not through cinematic trailers that hide the real game. Through the experience of playing. This is what matters. Does the game even freaking work? Does it have a clear identity? Does it respect the player's time? Does it give people a reason to care? Does it feel like somebody actually wanted to make this, or does it feel like a product assembled out of market research? That is where gaming is headed. And honestly, I think this is a good thing. Because if this realignment forces studios to stop relying on hype and start earning trust again, the industry will be healthier for it. That should not be a radical idea, but right now it kind of is. That is exactly why this shift matters.
Oh, hey, glad you're still here. I've, just finished syncing the next set of files for you. They're right over there on the screen. Take a look and, catch ya in the next one.